I'm Jane Page. I'm a volunteer at Humphrey Strong, and I'm here with Rick, and we're going to talk about his Uncle Iggy, who has a really wonderful story.
Yes, indeed. Hi, I'm Rick Pobieglo, and my uncle's original name is Ignacy, and his nickname was Iggy. Iggy will be the one we're going to focus on today. He was a Polish immigrant. Actually, he wasn't. His parents were from Poland. Iggy could speak English and Polish. They came over to this country around 1900. Iggy was born on April 7th, 1922. He was caught up in the Depression, and he was forced out of school when he was approximately 14 to work. He had a local job in a foundry, and then he went from there. He went to the Civilian Conservation Corps camps on July 11th, 1939 until October 1st, 1940. He was one of 12 children, and he enlisted in the Army September 16th, 1942. He went on with his friend who had been drafted as part of the buddy system. His friend was released as unfit medically. And then once that happened, Iggy went and had a conversation with a Army recruiter who informed Iggy that he could get an extra $50 to jump out of a plane. And that was $50 a month.
It was kind of interesting about the Civilian Conservation Corps camps. I never knew anything about them. That might be an interesting thing to explain. That
was set up by the president. I'm not sure which one. He was located in Pittsfield, where they made things like roads, bridges, campsites for people to camp at. The Conservation Corps actually paid kids to go out and work. They did a lot of things like sewer projects, road projects, cutting down forest, turning forest areas into livable and places to visit. And that happened across the country.
So he had quite the experience before he even got to the service at a very young age.
Yes. Him and my dad. My dad was 2 years older than Iggy. Like I say, they were best friends. I mean, my dad never really talked about Iggy's service, and I think that's what a lot of older veterans do. They just keep it inside them, and you pray that they'll open up someday and tell their stories. And that's why I would like to tell this story about Uncle Iggy. So Iggy decided to become a paratrooper for the extra $50. He would take his paycheck from the Army and send it home, and he would keep $5 for himself for the whole month. He was actually sent to Toccoa, Georgia. Toccoa, Georgia is a closed CC, or was a closed CCC camp. They turned it into an airport, but they were finding out that the runway was too short and planes were crashing, so they shut it down. And the Army took it over and set up a project. Their project was to train a special kind of paratrooper. They had 7,000 men that attended, and only 2,500 were the ones that were kept out of that 7,000. Now, in listening to a lot of older gentlemen, and one that I'd like to talk a little bit about was Colonel Ed Shames. Ed was my uncle's sergeant at the time when he first got to Toccoa. He talks about just some of the things that the guys had to do. And out of the 7,000 men that they had to pick from, if you were on the obstacle course, you broke your hand, your finger, or whatever, you were gone. They sent you home or sent you back to another base. And they wanted nothing to do with those guys. So it was only the first 2,500. And they were originally called from the 506th. Now the 506th is known for the Band of Brothers and the Filthy 13. Those gentlemen, Iggy had the privilege of being trained alongside those guys. Camp Toccoa was known for a few things. Number one, it had a mountain next to it. The mountain was called Currahee, and it's the last mountain on the Appalachian Trail that is there, and its elevation, I think, is like 12,000 feet. It's 3 miles up, and 3 miles down, but it's up and down, up and down, up and down, all the way up to the top. I've had the privilege, I visited Toccoa 2 years ago, so I had the privilege of being up on the mountain, and what a beautiful sight. But these guys had 60 minutes. That was part of their training to run the mountain, get back down. If they couldn't do it in 60 minutes, they were gone. The other thing about Toccoa, which I think is kind of funny, is outside the main gate of Toccoa is approximately 10 homes. Well, 9 of those homes turned their homes into bar rooms because they had 7,000 men on the base. They figured they'd make some money, and if they had any issues, the MPs were right there. So all the guys had to do was go out the front gate and find 1 of 9 homes that were turned into bar rooms. The other thing that is very impressive is the obstacle course. Now, the obstacle course was set up to be tough. It was set up by Colonel Sink. Colonel Sink was the one who also found the trail up the mountain for the guys to run. Colonel Sink was also in the Band of Brothers. He was the colonel that the Band of Brothers had. Colonel Sink set up the obstacle course for the gentlemen. A year after the guys left the base, they had the Army engineers come in and medical doctors and all sorts of people to look at the obstacle course. Well, and once they looked at it, they said that it was unfit for human consumption. In other words, these guys shouldn't have been trained on it because of the fact that it was unfit, and so many guys got hurt. But that's also where they got rid of guys. There's a gentleman from the Filthy 13. I can't remember, Andrew maybe. I can't remember his name. He was the one, they would go to the local farmers, the pig farmers, and get guts and everything. And he would actually go back to the obstacle course and drape them over the wire. So the guys would have to crawl under the bloody guts of the pigs. And that's one of the stories that I'll never forget. While I was in Toccoa, I ended up meeting a gentleman called Vinny Speranza. And for those of you who don't know, Vinny is the gentleman with the beer and the helmet. Now, we were privileged to have Vinny tell us, actually out of his own mouth, the story about the beer and the helmet. He had a buddy who ended up getting hurt in Bastogne. So he went to visit his buddy one night. And then you got to remember, Bastogne, when they were in Bastogne, it was the winter months. It was freezing. The guys had to dig their own foxholes, so they started digging them with their own bayonets. And that's how they ended up getting into their frozen foxholes. But Vinny went to the church to see his buddy, and he walked in, and his buddy said, hey, you got to get me a beer. Vinny looked at him, he says, where am I going to get you a beer? The whole town's blown up. Vinny, he says, I don't care. He says, go take a run. So Vinny ran 3 or 4 times up and down the road. And finally he saw a tap on the wall. There was a wall standing, but all the buildings were blown out at that time. So he went over and pulled on the tap. Sure enough, beer came out. He looks around, there's no pitchers, there's no glasses, there's nothing to put the beer in. So he says, oh, heck with it. Pulls his helmet off, fills it up with beer, runs it back to his buddy. His buddy drank the whole thing, and all the other guys that are sick or hurt or shot around him are screaming at Vinny, get me one, get me one. So Vinny made 5 or 6 trips back. And the moral of the story with Vinny is just some of the things that these guys did. And not only that, it's below 0 outside, and he's actually drinking a beer. But it was funny because Vinny didn't want nothing to do with the military. And that's the other thing that I talked about earlier, is a lot of these guys kept these stories to themselves. And it wasn't until they got home or when they were in their late 70s or 80s that they started talking to their kids, their grandkids, about their experiences during World War II. It was part of
Did he tell his family?
Yes, he did. He during the walk in the backyard with his, at that time there was, I believe, 11 brothers and sisters. And he turned around and he was kind of upset, and he looked at his brothers and sisters and told them that he didn't think he was coming back. And they all asked him why, and he said, well, I've been trained to kill with my bare hands. And that's part of the training he ended up getting with the Filthy 13. The Filthy 13 is a group of approximately 17 to 20 guys, and they were all either boxers wrestlers or people that knew how to kill with their bare hands. They did most of the training when they were at Toccoa. That's the hand-to-hand combat that they ended up getting was from the Filthy 13.
Why don't you tell us about when he actually was doing his parachuted into where General Eisenhower was?
Yes. And that's the other thing I didn't mention. The mountain at Toccoa is called Currahee. Currahee is an old Indian name, which means we stand alone, because it's a little ways off of the Appalachian Trail. And what these guys did from the 506, they ended up saying, we stand alone together. So their jump command was Currahee. They'd all yell out Currahee as they were going out the door of the plane. And when, actually before that, they had a few weeks off before they mounted a ship. And then the ship was the SS Samara. They fit 5,500 men on that ship. It was a cruise liner from England, and it only held 1,000 guys. So these guys were on the deck, they were everywhere. And according to a curator from one of the museums, there was only 5,499 guys that ended up making it. So apparently one guy fell overboard on the way to England. And of course, a big ship like that won't stop. I know things were really nasty in the boat. Guys were, every 3 days you were able to sleep inside on a bunk. Most of the guys didn't want to sleep on the bunk because of the smell and stench inside the ship. So they were able to sleep outside in the open air. Once they got to England, they ended up going to Ramsbury. Ramsbury was one of the major training centers for the 101st Airborne. Now, they weren't called the 101st Airborne until they were in England, and that's when they became the Screaming Eagles, which was the 101st Airborne. And also the 82nd Airborne, which is another paratrooping company, joined the 101st at the same time. Iggy was chosen as one of the paratroopers to jump for a demonstration jump with Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower attending. We have a letter from Iggy stating that the other day he was fortunate enough to be picked as one of the participants in a jump in the U.S. honor for Winston Churchill.
And that was just 1 month before D-Day, right?
Yes, that was 1 month before D-Day. According to Iggy's letter, it was approximately his 15th jump. In talking with Ian Gardner's helped me out quite a bit. Ian's an author and a historian from England. Him and I, Uncle Iggy's name was actually in Tonight We Die as Men, which is a book that was written, and it's mostly interviews from guys during World War II. Well, so a gentleman called Hank DiCarlo was the one who mentioned my uncle's name as a casualty of war. And when I was reading the book, to me it was kind of strange to see my own uncle's name in writing in a book. But I called up Ian that day after I finished the book, and I said to Ian, Ian, do you have a few minutes to talk to me? And he got right back to me within 5 minutes, and he said, it's your last name. I've seen it somewhere. So, of course, I said, yeah, on page 321 of Tonight We Die as Men. And then since then, Ian's been a very good friend. The history that man knows is just unbelievable about World War II, and especially the 3rd Battalion of the 506, which Uncle Iggy was in. 2 weeks before D-Day, Iggy was fortunate enough to move to headquarters company. And in talking with another historian, Mark Bando, Mark had told me there was no rhyme or reason. I actually had met Mark out in Cincinnati, Ohio, at a speech. I went to a week conference for a gentleman called Pee Wee Martin. Pee Wee Martin is also from the 506. He was a machine gunner like Uncle Iggy. Uncle Iggy was an expert rifleman.
Explosives?
Yeah, well, no, not really explosives. He trained with the guys that were our first demolition company, which is the Filthy 13. The Filthy 13 were known as the explosive guys. They were an experimental group. The military wasn't sure what they'd get out of it. But those guys were all trained, like I say, they were either boxers, people who wrestled with their hands. They were just unbelievable what they did.
So, Rick, you've got a beautiful house here. Did you build it?
No, I did not. My grandfather built it in 1910. So it's well over 100 years old. It's been gutted out. So, of course, you know how expensive kitchens are. We just finished the kitchen about 2 years ago. This is the house that Iggy grew up in. I did say he was one of 12 kids. Mm-hmm. And most of the time he spent his teenage years were not in the house. They were either at the CC camp or at an army base. He was 22 when he was killed in action. Talking about his family, they were Polish immigrants. They spoke no English. All the kids spoke English and Polish. And it's this little one. But he has his back to us, and he was walking through the backyard. And that's the last picture that we know of that Iggy was in, family picture. And he has his uniform, and he's walking away. Now, he ended up having 2 weeks off when he got back from Toccoa. Just before they went over, or actually they went back to Fort Bragg, and then from Fort Bragg they went to Campbell, Kentucky. He was in England, getting back to England when all the gentlemen were there training. They did 8 hours of training. They did marches during the middle of the night with full packs. Iggy is also known for being the 3rd Battalion of the 506, is known for still holding a world record on the march that they made. They marched 149 miles in 75 hours, and to this day, that's still a record in the world. The only other country was Japan that marched, I believe, like somewhere around 100 miles in 72 hours. So those guys were lucky enough to still hold that record. Oh, and on the march, the march was 149 miles. They actually walked 148 miles, and they ran the last mile. They were told that there was photographers and newspaper reporters at the main gate. So before they got there, they jogged in. And that was with full packs. And Colonel Ed Shames was the one who was talking on YouTube about it. My research for Iggy has gone back 3 years. I've been lucky enough to talk to people, some people. Unfortunately, most of the guys who knew him are no longer here. So everything that I do by contacting either Mark Bando or Ian Gardner. Those gentlemen are just so much knowledge about World War II. General Eisenhower, the night of the D-Day invasion, gave a famous speech, and it was to the expeditionary forces. They gave the speech to the Allied forces. You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade, to get towards which we have striven for these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The eyes of the world are upon you. Iggy was one of the lucky ones because he was a headquarters company. They had 45 planes leave Exeter Airfield in England, all of which only 42 returned. 3 were shot down. Most of the expeditionary forces left out of a Pottery airfield. The Pottery airfield in England was a much bigger airfield. They had almost 750 planes leave out of there attached to gliders. Gliders were attached to the plane. So it was the ones that left out of Exeter were your Pathfinders, the Filthy 13, and I believe that's it, and guys from headquarters company.
And they lost 70% of the paratroopers?
Yeah, the numbers were somewhere around 100,000 men were killed that day, that morning. Iggy's planes actually left. They were in France by midnight of June 6th. They were a few hours earlier than the rest of the guys that were paratrooping. But like I say, you had the Pathfinder. Those are gentlemen who put out lights or beacons so the planes would recognize where to drop them in. Some guys were dropped almost 20 miles off course. Once the Germans started shooting, some of the pilots got nervous, and the gentleman ended up jumping out of the plane, like I say, up to 20 miles from where they were supposed to jump. This summer, I spent some time in Normandy, and I was lucky enough to find out where my uncle had landed, where he jumped, and what field he had landed in. And we found out where he was buried. He was killed on June 23rd, D-Day plus 17 in Normandy. He was fighting against Hitler's German 17th SS Panzer Division. He also fought against the 6th Fallschirmjäger. He fought against the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, which was mostly Polish kids, which once Hitler went into Poland, he grabbed a lot of the Polish kids and turned them into his military men. And so Iggy, being Polish speaking, I think was put up front. He knew the language, he knew what they were saying. And his job, Iggy's job, well, along with the headquarters company, was to protect the bridges. Their job going into Normandy was to take over 4 bridges. And work with the Filthy 13. Now, the Filthy 13 blew up 2 of those 4 bridges, so the Germans weren't able to cross them. Those bridges led to Omaha and Utah Beach, which if the Germans would have made it past his group of guys, headquarters company, they would have had free access to the beaches and would end up killing a lot more men than what they did. They had total control of the bridge. I think about an hour after their jump, and they held it for 17 days, and that's when he was killed in action. We don't know how he was killed, and that's part of my research, is trying to find out how he was killed, whether it was a demonstration or in a line of duty. He also was lucky enough to go to 2 ceremonies, the medal ceremonies for guys that paratroopers that were extraordinary and ended up getting medals at the medal ceremony. The medal ceremony was held in Carrington Center, and usually Colonel Sink and other generals and whatever would attend the medal ceremony. Now, there were 3 medal ceremonies. Iggy was believed to be at 2 of them, and we don't know if he was actually at the 3rd one. But not only that, they were being mortars and machine gunners were shooting at him as they were going through the medal ceremony. And so I'm assuming that he was either killed in the line of duty or at the medal ceremony, which was the 3rd one that was held. Headquarters company of the 506 101st Airborne entered the town of Carrington. After heavy fighting on 2 previous days, they met little resistance. The bulk of the surviving German defenders of the 6th Fallschirmjäger paratrooper regiment had withdrawn from southwest Carrington. Iggy was also in the Battle of the Bloody Gulch, which started on June 12, 1944 and continued until June 30th, 1944. Ian Gardner and Mark Bando, who were expert historians and authors, believe the battle where Iggy was killed in action on June 23, 1944. On June 26th, the Daily Report mentioned Iggy, Uncle Iggy, as killed in action on June 23, 1944. The report was written and signed by Colonel Ed Shames, who is well known for the Band of Brothers. He was Iggy's commanding officer at that time that he signed the Daily Report. And I do have a copy of that, and that's part of my history, things that I've found out. And Iggy was also known as part of the greatest generation that lived and sacrificed their lives during World War II. Iggy was buried on a farm in Normandy. along with the American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Screaming Eagles, from June 44th until sometime in 48, when the Normandy Military Cemetery was built. At that time, my grandmother received a letter in the mail asking if she would like Iggy's body sent home or to be put in the Normandy Cemetery. At that time, she was very, very upset with the whole war situation, that she lost her son. And then when the Army showed up to give her the Purple Heart, she said she didn't want the Purple Heart, she wanted her son back. And a lot of families went through that, not only mine, but a lot of families across this country. And a lot of guys they're kids. They were actually kids. Iggy was 22 when he was killed in action. Anyways, yeah, his body ended up coming home on a train, and he's buried in the Bonsall Cemetery, which is the next town over. It's part of Palmer, the town of Palmer. And Iggy was actually born and raised in Three Rivers, which is also another village of Palmer. And he was buried on May 1st, 1948, over here. Along with some of Iggy's medals, he received the Army Good Conduct Medal, the American Campaign Medal, the European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, 1 Bronze Star, World War II Victory Medal, the Combat Infantry Badge, the Presidential Unit Citation, the Parachute Badge, and 1 Combat Star. I believe the Combat Star was for each jump you made. And there were 4 jumps that the military paratroopers made during World War II. This is Iggy's original war Bible. He was lucky enough to receive it from his girlfriend, who was from Campbell, Kentucky. She was actually one of 11 kids herself, and she purchased the Bible for Iggy. We were very fortunate to have this. A lot of these things didn't come back with the soldiers, or because they kept them in their pocket. It also has a metal front cover, and they say that would be, the gentleman would wear it in his pocket, and that would be just in case he got a bullet to the chest. And we've all heard those stories. Oh, well, they shot him and the metal hit the metal, and the guy saved the guy's life. Well, that's the same thing with the Bible. And we do have a few things from Iggy. We have quite a few letters that he wrote home. I believe that's it.
Well, that was pretty interesting. Thank you for telling that story.
You're welcome.